Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And let's invite Alex to take over the screen and continue this presentation, his teaching, his understanding, and continuing the direction and the dimension of this plasma technology, which again takes quite a long time to become a master in it. But thank you, Alex, again for sharing with us so frequently, so often, so consistently, week after week, until we get it. So don't give up on us yet. Thank you. Please take over. And thanks for your presence.
And thank you very much, Mark. How did you know I was getting ready to give up on you?
Oh, no, you're not. That was just my physicality kicking in.
Oh, you are being sarcastic. Yes, yes, yes. I wonder if the universal community gets those jokes.
Maybe. They're quite knowledgeable.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can have some fun today, because in my neck of the woods it's raining profusely. It's the second day in a series of forecasted 2 weeks of rain, and the roof is leaking, and too bad, I guess, eh? But I want to welcome all the people from the North American team here, and you understand that it's the participants from around the world that are supporting us. That is what makes this meeting so very strong, and as such, we're always following in the footsteps of the workshops that run every week. And we're the third in the group here because the Brazilian community presents on Fridays. And so here we are on a Sunday, and we're trying to figure things out. Really, we are. And I hope you enjoy this trip, because we are on a trip. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the review process. The subject is intermediate Earth space. This was presented about a year ago. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is October the 8th, 2023. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So welcome one and all, and we are trying to figure a few things out. You know, everyone has an angle, and but we have to see that there are things that are man-made, and then there's the role of man, and they're different. They're created differently. And so when we say man-made, that's made on Earth, and the role of man doesn't necessarily mean only Earth. But since we're into the Earth space review, maybe the role of man on Earth is a good point of view. So what is the role of man, and what's your angle? And many of us are faced with the prospect of being aware of the new technology and trying to figure out how this is going to work. and it may be causing some hesitancy, but there's a whole raft of people out there who are not aware. And it's more than just hesitancy. It's just they're not even on the train. They're not even on the platform. In fact, they're still on the donkey. And we're trying to teach in such a way, because this is not only the universal order of creation of matter, but it's the universal knowledge. And so it's for everyone. And Mr. Cash has published 3 books, and getting into the second one, we have the structure of light. And then the third one, of course, is the origin of the universe. And one would rightly think that the origin of the universe would be book number 1. But there is a progression, and so we can see that what goes around comes around. And so at what point is the beginning and what point is the end? So as we're trying to get on this plasma highway and understand that we're not on this highway, this is something that's in our dreams. And that's the only time we get on our highway. But can we manifest these dreams in reality? Or are the dreams the reality? And so we've all spent all of our lives searching for outer space. But this is really emblematic of our embodiment of our little piece of pie in the sky. And that's what we have to understand. And we've been trying to, this week, we've done the preliminary soul transmutation test. This will carry on next week. And then there'll be more tests running towards the end of the month. This all began on December the 16th. And a lot of people are wondering why that was the key moment on the calendar. It was because that was the fulfillment of the prophecies. So we have to understand what prophecies are. Prophecies assume that there's not going to be any change. So in the absence of change, you can prophesy the future based on the present, but you can't prophesy the change. So the cups of life is emblematic of that, because no 2 cups of life are the same. And the purpose of the cups of life is for life. That's a key point. They were introduced during the pandemic, but they were not the cups of the pandemic. They represented the core space that was part of your inner space. And that's why each cup is different, because each cup has a different emotional strength. And this is a very important theme, considering the fact that we were using elements in these cups of life. And so we try to understand our earth space. And as I say, this is part of the intermediate earth space, which is the extension of teachings that have tried to put together in a more concise package over 6,000 hours of teaching. And now in this review process, we're trying to get that down even into less time. So, we've all spent probably 6 to 9 hours on these classes, and now we're going to try and get this done in short order. And we did have to take, by the way, those who follow the calendar, we did have to take a little sojourn into outer space in the basic outer space series. And so those who are following the calendar will understand why the sequence is out of order. But we're back on the intermediate path here. And so we're talking about the magnosphere, the volcano's geology, polarity, speed of rotation, and bountifulness. What is that? What is the bountifulness? So as we're all searching for outer space, and we all seem to be very happy with that little piece of pie in the sky, and we have to realize that when we look at the rest of space, we find that our little piece of pie is just that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, and the outer space is the rest. And how much is the rest? And that's a good question. So And we've never been able to really latch onto this pie. It's just like a phantom pie. And so what is a phantom? And that's something that's apparent to the sense, but has no substantial existence. Some people lead their lives that way, don't they? And are satellites that pie in the sky? Or do satellites become spaceships? Are we already dream satellites? And which dimension is the reality dimension? We keep asking these questions, but we need to ask these questions because no one is forthcoming with the answers. And just because they don't have the answers doesn't mean that we shouldn't answer them, because you exist. And this is the reality dimension. So we find that outer space is not a place, it's a method of transfer of energy. And this energy is energy in motion. It's all a part about life. And our life has been this sentimental little pie in the sky. And it seems pretty big when we're here, but I mean, when we look at the other planets and we see, well, you know, it's not Venus and it's not Mars. So this is us here, somewhere in between those two planets. And we've created boundaries. And then there are other planets. And for some reason, we've chosen this particular location. And we like it. But this location has seasonal changes. So sometimes it's summer and sometimes it's winter. And it doesn't seem to affect our target shooting. We always seem to get here. And if the seasonal changes are reflected in the position that we have with respect to the sun, then, you know, we're not really shooting at the bullseye, are we? Because the Earth is rotating around the sun. But it rotates around every day. So the daily changes are not the seasonal changes. Something else causes the seasonal changes. So what we're looking at is this vanishing point as being our point of confirmation. So this confirmation is some space. It's some space between a launch point and a landing point, isn't it? That's the reality dimension. And so we see the verification point as being part of transmission and the validation point being as part of transition. And these are the limitations of science. They don't account for the point of existence, which is the point of transmutation. And then when we create this Magnosphere condition that's in a balanced position, we can't see it. We can only see it when we land in some space. And so this puts a limitation on our soul, because now we have to differentiate between plasmatic reality and physical reality. This is the whole purpose of this review series, is to identify our position, because our position is man space. And how does our space relate to the Earth space? And our space is difficult enough to understand. And it's easy to be self-centered in such a manner that we think the whole universe revolves around each and every one of us. And if that were true, with 8 billion of us on this planet, well, that would be mass confusion. And yet, we do have mass confusion. So it's not mass confusion on a physical basis. There's possible mass confusion on an emotional basis, but is there mass confusion on a soul basis? So I think we can conclude here that as we're sitting in this meeting, listening to this presentation, There is no physical confusion. Minute by minute, we're all in the same relationship. And our soul is not confused. Our soul has our best interests at heart or at soul. But the emotion, is that emotion of a soul? Or is that the emotion of a heart? Or is that the emotion of the planet? And so these are also good questions. And so there's an invitation there for confusion. That's elusive. It constantly disappears. You can't grab onto it. And that's our space. We're not talking about our space today. We're talking about plasma science. And so we have to define what plasma science and say it's a different kind of energy state. There are many different kinds of energy states, and they're all plasma. So what does that mean? That means there are energy states of varying strengths. And what we're trying to understand is our Earth space. So that's not man space, because within man space, we have to find our inner space. When we understand those two, I think that we will find the key to the gateway to outer space. And since it affects our life, it's pretty important. And if that's not important, then don't worry about it. Nothing's important. So we see that there are basic plasma rules, and we need to review this, and we need to be able to pass this information on to other people. And we all need to be good teachers as well as being good students. So we see that energy states increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude. That's 10 times. And the higher energy state feeds the lower energy state. So you see that's kind of a point of conflict right there. But energy state changes can manifest through natural creation or natural decay. So it goes both ways, but there's another catalytic transfer state, such as the sun. It's non-consuming. It comes up every day and gives us energy. And then it comes up the next day and it still gives us energy. So we find that the energy transfer comes at a rate. And the higher the plasma state, the higher the transfer rate. So it too changes by many orders of magnitude. And then we get into this plasma state, which absorbs fields. But it also is a barrier of fields. How does it know which way to do this? And what is the overriding rule? And so let's face it, plasma is bound to the ethos of the universe. And we know that because there's no confusion in the universe. The confusion is all in our home, because we don't understand relationships. We don't have responsibility where the scientific community takes the responsibility to understand how energy works, and we don't have the spiritual community taking on the responsibility to understand how we work with that. So it's up to us as knowledge seekers with the plasma science to add to the knowledge to bring these two relationships together. So the only question remains is what rate of change? How long is it going to take? I don't know. How big is large? If you're going to have a relationship, you have to have references. So a lot of people choose the spider versus fly reference. In other words, it's an adversarial reference versus a coexistence. And so we see that it's kind of like an awake state being a nano state and a dream state being that nano gap state. And so, well, wait a second. The nano, we can see the nano coating on the copper wires, But we can see the gap, but really there's nothing there, right? So we don't seem to have a trouble understanding that there is a dream state. Can't explain it. There's nothing there, but we give it a name. And that's part of our inner space. So all we're looking at is this awake state on our earth space. But remember, we go to sleep on this earth space as well. And so we have this dream on earth space as well. And so you can see the confusion in the relationships. And so this is where the science has to meet the soul of man for peace. So when we ask what peace we're talking about, that little piece of pie, this earth, which is our target. And we find that not only do we just have to get to earth, and not only do we come here different seasons, but we come at different times of the days, and sometimes it's daylight and sometimes it's night. But then there are other parts on this target. There's a magnosphere, which is like the brain of the earth. And then on top of the magnosphere is this crust. Well, that's where we are. This crust is made out of silicon dioxide or water. We call this the biosphere range. When you look at it, it's just a very narrow band around the world where vertical people, horizontal people, and man people live. And then there's the atmosphere, which is just above the crust. And then you get into the magnetosphere. And then you get beyond Earth space. So within the Earth space, you have this difference in density. But the thing is that we also have this moon space, which is beyond the magnetosphere. And there's that in-between space, Earth space and moon space. And it's a vacuum. There's no density. So we go from no density to a lot of density right down to the core. And so all of this is part of the Earth space, and we're in it. So it would be really good if we understood what was going on. After all, this is our home. But the unique characteristic of the magnosphere, you see, is that it is fluid, it is hot, it is dense, it is a gravitational relationship with the atmosphere. It's a sub-biosphere range, so it's below the crust. If that is the case, because it seems to be uniform all around the world, we should say that it's non-differentiated. It's when you get to the crust that you're differentiated. Please keep that in mind, because the vanishing point is at the core, and the soul of the earth is in the core. And we, as man space, are on the crust. And that's what we can see. So what I'm saying here is that when you look at this magnosphere positioning, which is undifferentiated, that magnosphere is a field. But that field is overlapping other fields. So we need to understand how much more can be taken into account, and then we have to decide how much to take into account, because it all depends on that relationship. So for instance, Mars space overlaps Earth space, and it overlaps our space, man space. Obviously, vertical people are there, and horizontal people are there, so their space. And then there's the moon space, and then we have all these satellites that go around. They have a space, and then of course the pink elephant in the room, the spaceship space. So And then you look at the rest of the universe and you say, well, wait a second, we're in that mix somewhere. Well, what's interesting is that the shape, the conformity. This is a key point. So it's a little bit flat at the poles because that's what gives you the shimmer. But the problem, of course, is as the energy goes around, when it comes to the end, it comes to a hairpin turn, very sharp turn. Well, how do you navigate that turn when the other turns are all graceful? This was a very sharp turn. So do we just make the turn, or do we go beyond the turn and then kind of gracefully come back and pick up the rest of the turn? Or do we do just a little loop on the inside, you know, follow the safety pin? Because we don't want to go outside, we want to stay inside, right? That's the side of safety. And so is that how the energy flows? And then how do we determine where this is? So we create these boundaries, but we see that these boundaries are just one boundary, they're amalgamation of a bunch of other boundaries. And if we were to say that each boundary is based on frequency or color, and then when we see that color, we choose that color, then we say, well, that's the boundary, and that's where we do the turnaround. And then we know that because from that turnaround, we now have to have a feedback. So as we come around, we're feeding, and then we get a feedback. And so this is all part of the feeding radiance, which then becomes another feeding radiance on the other side. So if our point of view is from the left side looking to the right side, as it comes around, whoa, we have to change our position here. We're going to have to go to the right side because the feedback radiance is going to the other side. And at some point, that feedback radiance has to be converted into a feeding radiance. Because when it gets to the other side, it has to do the same thing. It has to feed to another feedback. Otherwise, it's not going to come back. And if this is too simple a discussion, then it should be really easy to understand that the motion around this universe is coming or going depending on your point of view. So if it's part of creation, that creation has to have a counterpoint of decay. And that counterpoint is part of the creation. Because the decay has its own counterpoint, which is the natural creation. So collectively, what we call the natural creation has a balance between creation and decay. And the field of decay has a balance between the natural decay and natural creation. And then there's this other field in between, which is this bonding field. And it's a boundary which we've created artificially. We fudged that between creation and decay. But it's not just a boundary, it's a bonding fudge factor. So we can create, and when we see the cups of life, they have to create a field and then create a relationship with another. So let's say the cups of life are a creation, and like the neutron, they decay into an electron-proton combination. So what we have now is we have a relationship with the Earth space and the inertia of the Earth space. So is the cup relationship magnetical and the Earth space gravitational? And then the inertia is the combination of the interaction of those two fields? Is that the phantom field? Or is the man space the phantom field? Well, let's review. We have two souls, two emotions, two physicalities. And you look at the Earth space, well, it has two physicalities. It has a biosphere and a magnosphere. And then we have this one inertia. What is that? So this is part of our being a satellite in motion on this planet. Aren't we the satellite on this planet? So when you look at the creation, which comes from the sun, and the manifestation of the energy that comes from the sun and interacts with the earth, is an inertia field that interacts with our cups of life and then creates an inertia field which is part of our existence. So in other words, our existence on this planet, that's not us. And our existence outside of this planet, that's not us. We are on this inertia field that follows the peace dome. This is the satellite pathway that goes around the Earth space. All of us do this. And so it is this satellite pathway that leads us to our soul. And so how do we get to this pathway? So there's a sequencing. And so we look at the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth. That's what attracts the soul of the man. And so we converge to this point, and then that soul of the man can now interact with the soul of the earth. And that attracts the soul of the body. And so now we can go from there and take the soul of the body and interact with the soul of the earth and manifest that physicality of the body, the inertia field. And this sequencing comes together because there are two feeding dimensions and three feedback dimensions. And we are none of those dimensions because we are the inertia field, the product of those dimensions. This is where the synergy comes together, where 1 and 1 is more than 2. And is that true everywhere? Or is it just true on Earth space? And so we try and differentiate between what we call near space and far space. But, you know, where is this near space and where is this far space? Is the dream space near or far? Is the other universe near or far? And when you look at how things are done, are you the one, or is there a guiding hand? And then you look and you still say, this is too much for me to comprehend. I just want my little tiny perfect world, my little piece of pie in the sky, because this is all uncharted. I don't know how to do this. And yet there's a universal law where you can follow the moral leader. And this is where the teacher becomes a student. Because in order for a teacher to teach properly, there has to be some kind of guidance. And so when you say, do you hear me? Or are you believing what you're seeing? Are you talking to the teacher? Or are you talking to the guiding hand? Are you making your choices based on the default positioning values that you had? Are you able to sort it out? Can you get elevated to get over this rough road ahead? You have to tune into the universe and turn onto the flow of energy there and drop out of your resistance, drop out of your soul limitation, which anchors you to this emotional presence, and understand this. Do you have an emotional attachment to something in the past? And do you see that as a good experience? Or do you see that as a tragic experience? So I believe that if you take your tragic memory to sleep with you, you will have trouble sleeping. And so we block that out and we only remember the goodness so that we can get to sleep. So wouldn't that be desirable? Wouldn't that be the goal plan? Wouldn't that be the normal emotion of presence between the feeding cycle that you get from the sun and the feedback cycle that you get from the earth? And what kind of strength would you have if the foundation of that belief were the trust of the universe, as opposed to having to trust the limitations of the presence on this earth space? And when you see that the earth space is one space and we are each an individual space, so we are all independent and we're all different, but we're all tied to the same thing. So how does that work? And how does that affect us when we have some who prefer to live at the gates of hell and forget that the cross through double cross is your eternal burden? They made choices and bad choices, and they affect you because it binds up energy. They're self-serving, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have to be self-serving, but not at the expense of others, because then you deny them the capability of being self-serving. And then you have to work at it. And if you're working at it, well, you're doing this at the expense of yourself. You're drawing weaker energies. And so it distorts your vision. And so we can't seem to understand the difference between the transformation that we did in coming to this planet and the transportation that we do on this planet, or whether it's physically, emotionally, or mentally, because we're disconnected from our soul. We're not technically disconnected. We are figuratively disconnected. It's there. It keeps us alive because your soul is your friend. But we keep lying to ourselves and ignoring the truth and fabricating a falsehood, just like they do with genetic mutilation. You can create it, but there's this disconnect. And so it manifests itself into a different kind of physicality. But it doesn't take away the intent. One moment. Thank you. What is your intent? Meditate on that, because that is the pattern. And when you provide the pattern, that is the energy that you get. So what pattern are you creating? And why are you doing it? And how much does it cost you? Because it's a lot easier when the energy is flowing. And so if we understand that the self-serving, which is fundamental to our existence, can be done at the enhancement of others, well, if it can be done at the enhancement of them, then their self-serving can be done at the enhancement of you. Doesn't that make any sense? You know, because energy is a charge in motion as negative and positive. So the negative gives and the positive takes. And in that regard, the energy can be flowing or binding, and it is a two-way street. That's the point. So it can be binding to be self-serving, but it can be flowing to be self-serving to both and feeding to both. That's just a basic principle interaction that leads to this greater oneness where you become independent, but you're dependent on the other entities who are independent. And so your feeding radiance becomes their food, and their feeding radiance becomes your feedback radiance. And all of this is crossing no man's land for the common good. This is the greater oneness. And this is what we're talking about for 294 weeks, the one nation, one planet, one race for world peace, because that's how the universe works. We are the magnetical residue of the attraction and repulsion forces, which we call gravitational and magnetical field forces, represented through the convergence and divergence of energy field flows. And each one of us is an independent variable. And each one can reach another one. And we're all part of this interdependent universe. So as soon as you're dependent, then you can reach another one. And we can all go through this emotional transformation together. So each one can teach one. This is what one nation, one planet, one universe means. It's a whole different ballgame. And so those who don't understand it end up erupting like volcanoes. Now, what is a volcano? Well, it's a rupture in the crust. It's a rupture in the crust of a planetary mass object, such as Earth. Well, for instance, we're talking about Earth, and it allows hot lava, volcanic ash, and gases to escape from the magma chamber. Remember, we talked about the Magnosphere. And this volcano produces hot sulfur. And so the hot sulfur comes from this magma chamber. And when we look at sulfur mining, this is done in very dangerous conditions around volcanoes. And so when we look at the periodic table of elements, And we see the position of the amino acids, the relationship between carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. And then we see the relationship between the mediums, the sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. And then we look at the relationship of emotions and physicalities, the copper and the zinc. And then we see the relationship to iron, which is in our blood and anchors us to the earth, which is made of silicone. And the silicone is in the carbon family. And when it ruptures, it becomes sulfur. And sulfur is in the oxygen family. So the carbon and the oxygen are in the organic family, which is us, the horizontal people, and the vertical people. And the silicon and the sulfur are part of the Earth space family, which are inorganic. These are just some Earth space details to ponder. And so when we're looking at this shimmering flatness of this universe, and we have to understand that it's not just in one direction. And it's not just in one reference. The Earth has this as well. The Earth is slightly flattened at the poles. And why is that interesting? Because there's the rotating field around the equator, and then there's this perpendicular interaction that goes through the poles. And collectively, they create this magnetical field and this gravitational field. And so if we were to look at kind of from a side view along the line of the equator, and we could see at the 4 points of the compass, we have the Americas on the west and Asia on the east, Europe in the north, and Australia in the south. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And then we have this core interaction that's keeping everything together. But we do understand that this is a rotating field. But it's not one rotating field. This is a problem. And so we find that sometimes we get this eruption because it's a physical feedback pressure. It's like the Earth space has pimples. It's an expulsion of toxins. So it breaks this vacuum bubble because it breaks the vacuum process of healing. And then we have this magnosphere wobble. Why? Because the magnosphere is fluid, right? So if there's a wobble, that affects the magnosphere itself. So this could be one of the reasons that we have this feedback pressure that causes these volcanoes. And then, of course, we have these weather patterns, which is another story. But the thing about these volcanoes is that 80% of the volcanoes are underwater. So there's another thing when we look at the thing about the weather relationship with the magnosphere and volcanoes. When we look at the Pacific Ocean, we see this ring of fire. And it seems that the crust is very, very thin there. And so we have this El Nino phenomenon, which is accentuated every 4 years. And it has an above average sea surface temperature. and develops over the Pacific. And isn't it interesting that volcanoes are hot? And isn't it interesting that the floor of the Pacific is surrounded by what they call the ring of fire, the greatest number of volcanoes on this planet. So I think we're starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So let's understand geology a little bit more too, because you see, the geology is different in different parts of this world. And so we all are trying to figure out which dimension is the reality dimension. And the mining industry, well, they have to really dig deep because they're trying to study the Earth's crust. And they set up these classification systems with respect to the types of formations and the types of rocks. And the reason for that is because they're searching for these elements. Remember the periodic table of elements? They're searching for these elements for the purposes of mining. And so if you remember the business school of bankruptcy, where one man's garbage is another man's gold, well, one man's gold can be traded for garbage or whatever, because the value is measured by money. It's not measured by worth. This is the fallacy that we're following. So when we're looking at geological residue, we try and follow these striations, which are like grooves and scratches in the layered sedimentary rock. They represent deposits and fossils. And they come in what we call geological strata. And we try and read them like tea leaves. And so we built a whole industry where we mine the Earth's resources. Or should we say, we plunder the Earth's resources. Because we didn't make anything. The Earth made it. And we have no ecosystemic consideration. But, you know, this is an industry. And it supports geology, education, labor, equipment, and finance. And that's good. And we create this industry we call metallurgy, which is element extraction. But not all elements are in the same group. So, you know, there's oil refining, but not all oils have the same characteristics. And so we have to understand that there are different pressures at play here. So let's understand that gas can be compressed, but liquids are hydraulic. It's when you get into the solids that if you want to compress them, you actually crush them. So these are three different types of actions you have depending on the density of the element. And so when you see that the volcano erupts, it's very fluid. And then when it cools off, it leaves this geological strata. And so in some cases, you can see this angular strata, which indicates an uplifting. But then in other areas, you see this horizontal strata, and it's just in layers. And so I think we can see that by the difference, just in layman's terms, that the angular is an uplifting, whereas the horizontal is a piled on layer, and it only becomes visible through erosion. This becomes very important when we look at the Lost Book of Enki, because we were talking about this supposed alien race, you know, and Daddy Zanu and Enlil and Enki are the sons, and there's this planet Nibiru that's depleted of gold. And so they mined the Earth's gold and shipped it out. And we have this evidence at the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. And then we have this volcanic pool theory where we're searching for gold. And so then we look also for core samples. But sometimes we can fudge these core samples with what they call salting. Because we're looking for these natural resources, but we have to understand that this planet is rotating. And yet we have these minerals in specific locations on this planet. Say, for instance, we have copper in Chile and gold in Indonesia and oil in the Middle East. And they're relatively pure. This is why we build a mine, because the amount that we get is worth it. So when we look at this core interaction, we try and figure out how come this Earth is all rotating, every one of the continents is rotating on the same Earth, and yet some continents have more of one element and other continents have different elements. Maybe things are not as uniform as we'd like to picture them. Let's just move Australia over a little to the right here. And maybe we've got a different kind of core interaction here. And then we see that, you know, when you look at these elements, you have to understand that they're a product of two plasma fields. So the product is different. Therefore, the plasma fields that created that product must be different. In other words, the product is the inertial field. In other words, the Earth space is a product field, is an inertial field with the relationship within the universe. And so understanding the plasma science is an advanced plasma industry. And it involves a universal community interaction. And this is all part of the creation of the universe. So we have to take more things into account than just our little tiny perfect world. And so let's look at this polarity. Now we had to introduce that because we have different kinds of rotation. So we look at the principal matter, which are the PM ticks. They are the energy packs that are magnetically feeding us, and they create these force fields, and they are diluted into the combination of antimatter, dark matter, and matter gem. And then they are getting through this process of conversion at the point of being a magrav. Magrav being a balance between the magnetical gravitational force field. But it doesn't manifest into physicality until it gets the feedback from another magrav, which is our Earth space. And that becomes the physical field interaction we call inertia. And so when we look at how this field is rotating, we can see that it rotates, follows the equator, rotates around the pole. And yet the whole Earth is rotating. And in that process, energy is going out and energy is coming in. So we say there's absorption through attraction, that's gravitational. And then we say there's emission through a repulsion, that's magnetical. And then we see that the energy keeps coming, and this is all part of the magrav feeding dimension. But we have a magnetic pole and a north pole. Well, when we're looking at the dynamic plasma, we see the feeding radiance coming out of the North Pole and coming around and coming back into the South Pole as being part of the feedback radiance. So this is to maintain the inner space spectrum, what we call the Earth space point within the Earth space field, the physical manifestation field. And understand it's a two-way street as well. So there's an emission out of the South Pole coming around and going into the North Pole. But for simple terms, let's just look at the feeding radiance versus the feedback radiance. So this is a vertical transition. But then we have this magnetical pole, which is offset. Just like the way we took the core interaction and we said, well, we're going to move Australia over a little bit because we have these two poles. Well, if there's a rotation around these two poles, then there has to be another equator. So if we look at this perpendicular interaction, it's a lot more complex than we originally drew it. So we understand that energy is in motion as a two-way street. Well, there's also this wobble interaction. Well, that's another street, and it's interacting with the first two-way street. So it's two-way street interacting with another two-way street. And how far can it wobble? You know, if we look at the North Pole, and if it's going to wobble all the way 90 degrees, wobble down to the equator, well, that's not going to work, is it? Because the rotation around the equator is perpendicular to the rotation around the pole. So understand that our field is set up that way, interacting with other fields, which have to be set up the same way because there has to be a common denominator. So there we have automatically a process of selection. Call it discrimination. And as a result, there are other lines that follow around this planet. Because when we look at the plasma field, it goes all the way around. And not just because it goes around, but because it rotates. And so we have these vortex energy centers. But since they move around, they create these lines and they create these centers. And these lines then cross. And these are all done through the surface transition. And so they become a manifestation based on plasma transmutation. And so each of these vortex energy centers become a plasma polar energy center. And so these ley lines, they connect different vortex energy centers. And what's interesting is they are plasma polar energy connections. I don't pay too much attention to these ley lines and their positioning, but understand this, that Europe measures in kilometers and North America measures in miles. And there were way stations set up at the cross points of ley lines in Europe. And these way stations were replaced by cathedrals. And these cathedrals are not kilometers apart in Europe. They are miles apart. Anomaly or a plan? So is it just rotation, or does the speed of rotation matter? Right? So when we look at energy transmission and we think of telephone poles, right? So these are transition poles because they're perpendicular to the surface of the Earth. But the transmission doesn't follow the pole, it follows the line. It follows the surface of the Earth. So let's look at the compass settings and see what does that mean. Well, it means that the north magnetical pole and the North Pole are different. But they're not fixed, they wobble. And so the rotation is the combination of some formula, computation of the interaction of these two poles in their wobble. And which poles are wobbling? And does the pole wobbling affect the heartbeat? Or is the pole wobble the heartbeat? And what about rotation? Does the Earth rotate around the North Pole axis or the magnetical pole axis? And does that speed of rotation make a difference? Or does the wobble in general wobble around the North Pole and wobbles a little bit on the right and wobbles a little bit on the left? You know, which way is the wobble? Well, I guess it all depends on if you're in the east or in the west. So, you know, the Earth's rotation is just one big wobble pie. Well, this is pretty good. But interestingly enough, a gentleman by the name of Eric Laithwaite, he was a British electrical engineer, and he did a lot with maglev. Well, in fact, he was the father of maglev theory, not to be confused with maglev theory. But, you know, he developed linear induction motors and maglev rail systems. And once he made his speech at the Royal Institute in 1974, well, that was the end of that technology. That was suitably buried. But the things that we find is that the speed of rotation creates this field. And the field is manifested from this rotation. So the speed of rotation then affects the strength of the field. And so when you have relationships between different fields, you have to determine which is the higher, because the higher feeds the lower. So the thing is that energy state changes can transcend multiple energy states, because the speed of rotation affects the field strength. And so the relationship of the fields has to be accommodated for this strength. And sometimes you can't just go from one state to another state because you can't contain the energy. So that determines your positioning. This is all about the charge. So we understand that there's a rotating field. We understand that there's a polarity. We understand that there's a crossover of various fields. And when we look at the core components and we see, you know, the electron and how it is formed from these energy, plasma energy fields that come together. Sorry, and we look at the atom and we see that there's electron-proton combination and they form from these fields and they are rotating. So there's a polar rotation right there as well. But there's this wobble. And we understand with the Earth that we have these two hemispheres and they're rotating together. Well, they're wobbling together as well. But they rotate as one. And we're not really getting dizzy with respect to this wobble, but there is something that is getting busy. And if we look at the wind patterns on the surface, what is interesting is that in each hemisphere, there are winds traveling in opposite directions. That is to say, polar easterlies, westerlies, and then northern easterly trades. But when you compare that to the south, you find that the trade winds are blowing in the same direction. So things are very calm. And these are what they call the trade winds, because these are the paths the ships like to follow. But when you deviate from the center, you get into the westerlies, and there are westerlies in the north and south, and then you get to the polar easterlies, and there are easterlies in the north and south. Have you ever been to the ice capades? Have you ever seen that where the skaters all get in a line and they skate in a circle? And you find that the one in the center of the circle is hardly moving at all, just basically moving her feet and basically standing in one spot as if she were on the pole. And yet the skater on the outside is skating as fast as she can to keep up. Kind of like being on the equator, isn't it? But the thing about it, we don't have people flying off the Earth at the equator. If anybody is flying, they can leave from any airport anywhere on this chart. So they don't have to go to the equator to fly off the Earth. But for some reason, we have a difference. When we look at the skaters, the pattern that they produce is a rotating pattern on a flat field. The Earth is not a flat field. The Earth is a spherical field, and it's slightly flattened at the poles, but it's not flat. It's spherical. It's three-dimensional. And so this creates a bit of an anomaly. And this has to be wind speed. Because the speed is equal to the distance by the time. And regardless of where you are, going from the equator towards the pole, the amount of time it takes to go around the planet once is 1 day. So 1 day in the North America is the same as 1 day on the equator, or 1 day at the pole. So therefore, the time doesn't change. And really, the velocity can't change, because wherever you are, you're basically rotating with the Earth, and the Earth is rotating as one piece. So it's rotating at the same speed. And yet, the Earth is wide at the equator and narrow at the poles. If the velocity is the same and the time is the same, but clearly we can see that the diameter at 60 degrees north is narrower than 30 degrees north, which is narrower than at the equator. Well, if the distance is less, then something has to change. And since nothing is changing, this is creating quite a problem. So one of the ways to do this is to transfer energy. So that transfer energy can be manifested in these wind patterns. And especially when the winds come in conflict with each other, then they create this turbulence. That's fine about the wind speeds. But what about the circulation of the Earth itself? What causes the sphericalness of the Earth? Because technically speaking, shouldn't it be cylindrical? If it's just rotating around the pole, if every place is traveling at the same speed and in every place is going around the pole in one day, what accounts for the curvature of the Earth? There must be a dissipation of energy. So it isn't just distance. It has to do with energy. So some of the energy is different in the different winds because clearly we see as we move 30 degrees north, the direction of the wind changes, and then another 30 degrees north, and the wind changes again. So that's one change, but also the surface of the Earth changes. So we know that the Earth doesn't rotate the way the figure skaters rotate and the ice capades. That's why we're not living on a flat Earth. We're living on a spherical Earth. Because imagine if all the planets were in fact lined up on a flat orbit. So then the planets on the outside, they might be just flying off the edge of the universe. Or at least the solar system. But if the planets are rotating around the sun, the same way that the Earth is rotating around its axis, and if we look at the Earth as being spherical, then we can look at the rotating fields as being spherical around the sun. So when we look at the speed of rotation, the higher speed increases the field strength, but speeds can reduce or increase. But man space doesn't rotate. And then there's this thing that happens when there's a sudden stopping. Like in electric motors, you have what you call dynamic braking. Or when you have a driver driving a car and he comes across a dangerous situation, and he's slamming the brakes or hitting the binders. Wear a seatbelt, you're going through the window. So when you look at this magnosphere and it's fluid, and if there's a wobble, or there is a difference in energy, or if there's a sudden change, something causes it to hit the binders. Is that the reason for a volcano or an eruption? But our cups don't rotate. We put in a zinc plate, a nano-coated copper coil, and the copper coil, we developed this rotating magnetic field and this rotating gravitational field, and we know that they're rotating because they wouldn't be a field if they weren't, because energy is always in motion. And so when we look at the cups of man, different energy. One's emotional, one's physical. And then we add more cups. We add the earth cup and the inertia cup that comes as a result of that. And all of these work together as a cup of soul. All of them have their magnetical gravitational fields, and all of them have their soul, but collectively they have one magnetical representation and one gravitational representation and one soul representation. And so this is the difference in understanding the difference between the dynamic transfer state and the physical destination state. It's all based on our target practice, on how we go from the universal cup to the physical cup of our bodies. This is the difference between the feeding and the feedback state, from the universal cup to the physical destination state. And so when we enlist the services of the plasma units, and we can derive the feeding of that, because that feeding system is the same feeding system that the earth uses to create on this planet. But not just this planet, but it's also a product of the creation of the universe. It's how the universe was created. It exists from energy. Energy is a charge. It's always in motion. So the charge is always positive. It's just that it's coming to or going from something else. So all things are in combination. And the first thing that's in combination is the charge itself. So when we look at book number 1, the creation of matters, and we see the combination of the plasma matter, the addition of the matter, dark matter and antimatter. And then we see the motion of energy through all those vacuum fields in between Earth space and any other space, but it's full of principal matter. So energy is plasma field transaction currencies. This energy is a plasma field. And it's all based on a plasma interaction, where you have magnetical pushing, gravitational pulling. That's the Magnosphere condition. And so when we look at the limitations of science and how do we transcend that, we have to take into account the ethos of the universe. That involves morality, compassion, and courage. These are things that cannot be measured. It's all part of the creation. Yeah, it's a formula, but you can't put the numbers to this formula because they're constantly changing. The relationship is constant on both sides. But the values are not constant. And so they're affected by two things. They're affected by the universal energy, and they're affected by the soul family on this planet. So the soul family includes the humanity family, the vertical people, the horizontal people, and the earth space. All of those families. That's what determines this family. And we have to take that into account, because that's where the bountifulness comes from. This bountifulness, which, you know, we want our little piece of pie in the sky. And so we're living in the area of bounty hunters. We all came to this planet for a reason. And is that we came here to pillage and plunder? And what do we get? This tiny crust, this, what we call this biosphere range. Is that it? That's all we get? Really? All this effort for just that? That doesn't seem to be right. Is that all we get? Is this wobble pie? You know? This wobble between Earth's magnetic pole and its physicality? and this rotation. And so we find that the magnetic pole is physical and the rotation is physical. But there's got to be more. There's got to be a plasmatic magnetical field and a plasmatic gravitational field which supports this whole thing. Because this is all we have, is this little pie. And so we have to understand that there's a difference between the plasmatic and the physical. We have to understand that. So we describe it the same way. Why? Because the plasmatic field has to have a relationship with another plasmatic field, and then the product of those two fields interacting is another field. And that field may or may not be physical, because it depends on the relationship with another field from the same construct. As an example, here is a plastic transparent turntable. The top surface is the width of the rotating table. There are roller bearings that outline the diameter or the perimeter of the field in between. And then there's a plate that's underneath, a third plate that is the same width as the roller bearings. So if we understand the top plate is bigger than the bottom plate, and the bearings are in between. And so this gives us a chance to change the top plate and see what effect it has to the bearings and to the bottom plate. And so we put markers on the top plate, the red dots and the purple dot. And we're going to turn the table 180 degrees. But we want to see what happens to the bearing. And so we'll have to follow the bearing for you because all the bearings are the same. But what happens is, you see the bearing is at the top. It's no longer at the top. It only moves 90 degrees. But the purple dot is at the bottom. So the top turntable turned 180 degrees, but the bearing only turned 90 degrees. So looking from the top of the large turntable, that bearing is on the west side. So that's the point of view that we might have looking at it from the North Pole, because the rotation is counterclockwise. And what happens if we flip the turntable over? Now the west is on the east side, and now the bottom plate is visible. And you can see that it is narrower than the big plate. And that there's a track between the two plates these bearings ride on. So we're going to turn this bottom plate, which is now on top, and rotate it 180 degrees back and see what happens. So the purple dot is back where it started. And the bearing is back where it started. So to move the bearing 90 degrees, we have to move the red dot and the purple dot, I'm sorry, 180 degrees. So what I'm saying is that whether you're on the North Pole and you're rotating in one direction, and when you flip it around and you're rotating in the South Pole in the one direction, the bearings, which are in between the two rotating discs, remain the same. The northern hemisphere rotates opposite to the southern hemisphere plasmatically, but the Earth rotates physically in one direction because the Earth-space rotation is the interaction field of the other two plates. The Earth-space rotation is an inertia manifestation of the plasmatic interaction with the other two fields. So this is an anomaly. We have the soul of the body, and the physical body, whether we are the Earth or whether we are the horizontal people. And the Earth rotates, but it doesn't walk. But we walk, but we don't rotate. We rotate with the Earth around the rotation of the Earth's axis. This is why we are part of the inertia field of the plasmatic interaction. So our soul, which is the essential you, is comprised of the interaction between the plasmagen state and the mattergen state. And the soul of the body, which is the surrogate you, is the interaction between the plasmagen state and the environment state, which is a small m matter state. Right? So we have this dynamic transfer state going into this physical destination state. And what holds the soul of the man is within the supragranular layer. And what holds the heart is within the soul of the body. But the soul of the Earth also has relationships. So when we look at outer space, we have to understand that the soul of the Earth is like the field photon relationship. You have to take into account the soul of the sun and the soul of the man and the soul of the Earth. But when you look at the inner space, you have the particle wave thing, the soul of the Earth body, and the soul of the body. And then the Earth space itself has a physicality of the Earth body. Well, we have a physicality of the body as well. So we see that the soul of the Earth relationships and our relationships with our soul are very similar. So the sequencing of the planet is where you have the soul of the sun and the soul of the solar system that attracts the soul of the Earth. The Earth has to be here before we come here. It can't come to nowhere. It can only come somewhere. So here comes the soul of the Earth. And now that you have the soul of the Earth and the soul of the sun, this attracts the soul of the Earth body. Now that you have that, the soul of the earth body and the soul of the sun manifest the physicality of the earth. Now that that is here, now you can make a decision. And now that you're here, you have to continue to be here. You have to continue to exchange energy. So you find that the peace dome is the dynamic soul of the earth body. And you interact with that. And so the interaction through the peace dome is the manifestation of whatever happens on this planet. Because the peace dome interacts with the soul at the core of the earth. And our souls interacting with the peace dome, interacting with our souls at the core. And this is how we go from this dream-made to man-made state. Going from the aminogen state to the post-amino acid state. This emotional transformation. So we are in the biosphere of peace. The earth is bountiful, and the majority seeks and will answer the call to freedom and emancipation. It's the universe that's normal. The earth seeks freedom and emancipation, and man's existential crisis defaults to the harvest of the plasma energy of the plasma universe. There are no guns or conflict here. There's no United Nations of vertical people. So our pursuit of happiness is really a launch field failure, because we have never launched a rocket into outer space. And survey says 100% of souls born preferred the bountifulness of Earth space as opposed to Mars space. And how do we know that? Because you were born. We had a preference and sentimentality to be born on Earth space, and we were born using the outer space system. And so we were born into our inner space, and the target was Earth space. So Earth space can become part of our round trip. Round trip from where? And this is only half the trip. And if we flip it to the other side, where's the other half? Is this just the midpoint? Not really the destination point? Or is this what we have to understand, how to cross this inner space peace bridge? Because we're inherently peaceful. Okay, so it's the launch point. That's not me. And the landing point, well, that's not me either. You and me are the go-between. This is where science meets the soul of man for peace. And in our hearts, we remember Neil Howe from Australia. And thank him for his efforts at the KAKT TV network. And now we have excitable visitors who also want to come here. So they're basically working on a reverse dreamscape, right? They want to come here. So many of us want to leave, but all residents welcome other souls. Question is, which reality dimension did they come from? And tourists, they all want to visit heaven, but they prefer the bountifulness of earth. So we must be in heaven. All residents are fields. All residents have souls. All fields have souls. And we're in the post-September 22nd, 2022 era of choices, where we can transmute from outer space through this graceful space into Earth space, that bountiful space. So let me tell you a story about the birds, the bees, and the flowers, and the trees, and the moon up above, and that thing called love, which is the soul harvest between an untangible reality and a tangible reality, as manifest in the science that we have the universal body enhancement unit and the material enhancement units, where plasma science can be exchanged for peace. And we're looking at all the different spaceships that we have and understand that the biggest spaceship right now, we're riding on it. It's our Earth space, and we need to take care of it. That's why we came here in the first place. We're seeking this greater oneness. Oneness with us, oneness with our family, oneness with our planet. And this planet becomes part of the rest of the family. And it's the plasma science which is transcending the limitations of this nuclear science. And we've been telling the world 506 Thursdays in a row in the Knowledge Seekers workshops. Is anybody listening? To understand the difference between matter plasma, which is a low energy state, and the capital M matter plasma, which is a plasmatic higher energy state. They have different rates of sensitivity. And you know that because you can sense it. You are part of the dynamic plasma. You just have to identify the fields of reference and the interaction preference. But the thing that has changed is we're moving away from the materialization science. We're in a totally different new space age. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. Welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers. Life's learning lessons transmute your preference and your sentimentality. That's why the World Peace Treaty needs to be signed with the pen, with your heart, with your soul, with meaning, because that is the representation of the dilution of emotion, which allows the fields of life choices to be free from boundaries or abuse. It's the ethos that maps your position, and the universal community is your travel guide. The speed of love manifests and determines your inner space emotional constructs. So we have an earthbound soul family, and we need to elevate to go through this gravitational transformation and restoring physical and emotional vitality. This is the emotion of knowledge that is embodied in the transmutation connection. And this connects equally to the universal cosmic rays freedom channel. This freedom broadcast of inner space. It's the earth space bountifulness which resonates with the proper plasma universe. So we understand that plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of this review. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
We did. Where can we get our next ticket? Next week?
Same place, same channel.
Good. We look forward to it. Wow, you talk about signing the peace treaty, Alex. How about these Chinese generals? Wouldn't that, in a way, they would probably think it would be, in a way, a disgrace or something if their boss didn't understand the peace process or what's going on this planet. They'd probably force them out of their position. How can you be a general and sign a peace treaty? when you're here in a way for war. So that may be a little bit difficult unless your boss knows about the peace that's being delivered. Wouldn't you say? I mean, if I was a nurse, no problem signing the peace treaty. But if I'm a military man, that would be like, I mean, they say we fight wars to bring peace, but it would seem like military people may have a hard time because they're so ingrained in thinking war in a way is the solution.
Well, we have to remember that every soldier signs up to defend their country, but they get deviated off of that original path, right?
Right. Remember what they did with people who were peace people here. They put them in jail, like they didn't want to go to Vietnam or other, what do they call them? Oh gosh, I can't think of the name. They call them peaceniks. No, something along that line, non-combatants. The military wouldn't treat them so favorably. We want you to fight. We don't want you to make peace. So that's
yes, but you look at the PTSD that the military men have, and you realize that something is not right. And I'm fortunate not to have been exposed to that, but I hear the stories, and when these big tough guys come and they stand in front of you crying like a baby because what they wanted was to defend their country. They didn't want to murder women and children. And, that's the product of having to take orders. So, it's not, they say it's not for you to reason why, it's for you to do or die. And, and they do it and they commit suicide afterwards because they can't sleep with it. There's not enough money in the bank. There's not enough zeros behind there. It's fun to be a soldier of fortune and it's fun to make a lot of money, but what's the point when the value of life is only worth, the value of the dollar?
Well, hopefully they sign it with the pen of their soul, as you said. That way they can kind of, at this point, keep it to themselves, even though they have to do their job at the same time.
Yeah, but this crisis is affecting everybody around this planet. And, it's hit such a scale where it has its own momentum. But, every time we look at this and then we examine and find out that, this is not really the preferential way to go because it's conflicts with the reason that we were born. We weren't born with this intention. So we've obviously developed it in this environment. So why would we do that? Why is there that conflict and what can we do about it? And then we come to the real problem. We just talk about it. We can't do anything about it. That's why this history of wars is, you have calculated 5,000 wars. Yeah, how many times do you have to repeat the same thing before you learn the lesson?
Apparently,
There are no winners in a war. You have to spend money and energy to enter a war.
big time.
Okay. Yeah, you have to spend it. You're the warmonger, you have to spend it. So, what kind of business plan is that?
So you said man is inherently peaceful. but yet Mr. Kesh said we're trying to make a peaceful man. So what is it? We have it within ourselves, or that's our nature to be peaceful, but yet, like emotions with men, they say you can't show it. You can't show your emotions, otherwise you're not a man.
Well, have you ever seen a baby come out swinging?
Not usually.
No, no, pretty gentle. Yeah. So, you know, you don't see them coming out smoking a cigar and carrying a machine gun, you know.
Although that birth canal process does cause a lot of trauma, as I understand it. Maybe it's psychological. I mean, they do come out crying, don't they? Or is that when they get popped on the bum?
Oh yeah, well, this who initiates the contact?
Yeah. So if they come
Uh,
in and they say, wait a minute, I'm peaceful, but I'm already
yeah,
getting
but
tapped around here. I'm already
yeah,
getting bumped up.
yeah, yeah. I didn't sign up for that. Well, what did we sign up for? You know, because that's one of the causes of depression on this planet. What did you sign up for? Why are you here? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And who
Well,
cares?
I don't think most people have a clue from the time they were born to the time they pass away.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So, you know, it's you know, one thing to argue and say, well, you know, I care about this and I care about you and I care about what you do, but that's not for me to do. I have to care about what I do. I have to take care of my business. You have to take care of your business. And so if what I'm doing is helpful to you, and then what you're doing is helpful to me, well, this works. And you know, we have to understand that Chinese proverb where you know what they do, they give you, well, maybe it's Japanese, I'm not sure, but you have this big bowl, and I mean big, okay, like 3 feet in diameter, and you get a 5 foot spoon, okay, 2 meters, right? So you get a 2 meter spoon and a 1.5 meter bowl of soup. Now, how do you feed everybody? How do you feed each other? If you're alone, you're going to go hungry, aren't you? Hello, Mark.
Yes. I'm just thinking about this 3 foot bowl, 5 foot spoon.
Yeah, it's bountiful, you know. What do you call it? It's all you can eat, or all you can slurp.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they just follow what the trend is, as you said, with your friend, with all these big high-end cars and everything, and the big house and the rest of it. You know, you see Jay Leno and other ones with all these car collections. They don't have a clue of what it's about. They've never been taught about serving is the key, not building a throne in the matter state.
Oh yeah, exactly. But
So
let's go back to this soup here, you know, because I'm getting hungry here. So, you know, it'd be nice if I had a couple of buddies that could pick up this spoon, okay, dip it in the bowl, and then push the spoon in my direction, and then I can sip from the spoon, right? Then they can pass off the spoon to someone else, and they can hold the spoon and pass it to you. The point being is that when you work as a team, you all get fed. And I think even Mr. Cash mentioned this, and you know, when you go to a Chinese buffet, all the plates are put in the table, right? You don't get your own dish. You get a pair of chopsticks, right? And you just pick and choose whatever you want to eat. It's a community feeding table, right? You look at these Chinese restaurants and they have 8 chairs around the table. You know, it's a pretty big family, I would say. So,
But like he said, instead of just using the chopsticks to take a little bit off each different plate, some people actually pull the plate off and put it in front of them just for themselves.
well, this is what I did when I first started, right? I mean, that's how we're brought up in North America or Europe, right? Perfectly normal. But you know, not normal in China, you know. The plate is for you, you know, you pick something up with the chopsticks, and you know, the plate is to catch the crumbs and whatever, or for dipping sauce, or whatever you want. So you're all sharing the food. It's a feeding.
And this is what China seems to be offering or suggesting in this white paper that they've put out about this collective development, working together. It's almost very similar to the one planet, one nation, one race.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, to understand something, you have to understand the extremes. So let's sit at this table now, and there's 8 people around the table, and you're the only one who's eating. So at the end of dinner, you get all the food and nobody else eats. Now, I'm just asking you, you know, what is the emotion that is now being generated at that table? You're obviously well satisfied, right? What about the other people at the table? Aren't they hungry? Okay, so what's the other extreme? The other extreme that everybody has so much food that you know, everybody collectively only eats half the food, because the other half has to go into the garbage. What kind of emotions are going there? Yeah, obviously some people wouldn't care, right? That's, you know, that's the bounty of being bountiful, right? So we can be wasteful. So what I'm saying is, here are the 2 extremes. So what's the midpoint? And you see the food, the sign at the buffet, the all-you-can-eat buffet. Please only take as much as you're going to eat.
Right.
They give everything they have, but you take what you need. What's wrong with that picture?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that picture. You're just taking what you need, not more than you need.
Right. So the question then becomes, is what are you determining is your food? So for some people, food is their food. For other people, adulation is their food. For other people, power is their food. You know, for others, money is their food. For others, attention is their food. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
But what is the difference? The difference is how you're drawing this energy and the source of this energy. So if you're seeking attention, then that attention has to come from others. So that means you're drawing and you are the lowest energy source, and you're drawing from another energy source that is also low. So why are you choosing to draw the energy from a low state when the energy from a higher state is bountiful? I know what my problem is. I'm sorry. My problem is I'm trying to be logical.
All right, well, let's see if anyone else has something they'd like to comment on or take exception to. We can talk back to the teacher here. He's not going to bite your head off. Oh, good. I was thinking of Selena had come in and she probably has something to share. I noticed Nikolai came in. I was thinking about Nikolai actually this morning. And I said, gee, we haven't seen him for quite some time. He did pop in, but I think he popped out. But that was a nice
say
sign.
something?
Of course.
Yeah, hi, Selena.
Hi, how are you? Say something or just he
Yeah,
disconnected?
that's why we all have microphones. That's
Oh.
what it's there for.
Yeah. I want to say something about the soldier. I have few member in army in my country, and they're old. Some of them die. Most of them not die. Father has 7 brothers, and one was. I was that time very young. That my uncle died. Some kinds of problem. And then after a few years later, my parents died too because of the young son dead. Take anymore, so they get sick and die. So sometimes I think about that. I did try to go to the army. I was thinking one day, maybe I can go to the army too, but I didn't go. Dad didn't allow those kinds of stuff. Women can go to the army. Now I think it was a good idea.
Very good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
For your own,
And
well,
then,
as Alex was just saying, with this post-traumatic stress issue that many have if they get involved in these wars. Yeah, go ahead, Selena.
yeah, the people who join army, they're one kind of, no, they're taking order from the higher level. Whatever they're saying, the general or people who are what they have to do. It's like a slave. They don't know. They don't have any choice. And they're thinking they're doing good for the country, doing good for people. But in the bigger picture, they're doing worse for them. They're doing country, and they're doing worse for the whole world. But they're not in that state to know what they are doing, programming.
Yeah.
So we need what is going on, what is the bigger picture. So unless we do that, the always try to do control you, makes life of you and your family. They suffer a lot, people, but they don't have the bigger picture. That's all. There's nothing else.
Yeah,
The
but there is
same thing. Yeah.
there is a motivation that pushes them to get into that activity, you see. And that word is revenge. So when there's a revenge, then someone pushes themselves happily, I guess, or willingly to get into that conflict, right? The question that I have about the revenge is, if you get into the war and you kill someone, that someone is somebody's father. And that child who lost that father grows up and is going to seek revenge. And then
Yes.
that child kills you. And your child
Yes.
is going to grow up and seek revenge. The question
Yeah.
becomes, who's the aggressor and who's the revenge seeker?
Ongoing aggression.
Ongoing, thank you. That's right. Okay. And yet, when you look at the headlines, you know, there will be revenge or evening the score, right? You never even the score. It's impossible. The only evening of the score is in the energy that you're born with. So, you know, if you are stealing energy from others, then there will be a balancing coming for that.
Yeah, and I think the military, if they change their focus, could do a lot of good. They could really be a force for peace rather than a force for destruction. I think they have a lot of talent in the military and a lot of great people willing to serve, but they're just, again, following orders, as you say. Otherwise, the alternative, they do have a choice not to follow the order, but then the alternative is a court martial, meaning you've disobeyed orders. You are going to be put on trial, and most likely you're going to serve some time on hard labor or whatever they do. So they do have a choice, but most people will follow the order rather than to be court-martialed. But
Well, yeah, this
a
is
lot of talented people in the military that can be used to work this piece out and deliver it and do so much building. The Army Corps of Engineers and so many, they have a lot of talent, really great talent.
the situation really changes when you look at the terminal aspect. So you know, a lot of once they get into the office ranks, they don't call it you know, serving their country anymore. They call it a military career. But you know, when you look at a military career, and you compare that to another career, if you're I mean, realistically, you don't go into a career with thinking that there's a possibility of you dying in that career. But you know, it happens in certain careers, maybe in construction or something, you know, that you could have an accident that could be fatal. Yeah, no, I get it. But a military career, the probability of dying in that career is actually quite high. So that really, I think, would be more in your mind's thinking. And so I don't think I would call that a career. Serving your country, you know, is a necessity in some countries, but you can serve in so many different ways. But you know, a career choice, that's a different type of vocation. But you know, and that's the name that they choose to use on that. The point being is that when you're entering into a career, you have certain expectations, but circumstances can change that for you. And then all of a sudden, you're put into a situation that you didn't expect and it's terminal. You don't get a chance. You don't get a chance to correct that decision. It becomes fatal. You die. Whereas if you go into another career and you were unsuccessful, you may go bankrupt. And in that case, you would get another chance. And this is the difference what I'm looking at. When we make choices in life, and those choices are terminal, it really becomes very important for that decision to be a very good decision. A very good decision. So, and that's a tough choice. Because I've had a chance to look back in my life and see the choices that I've made, and I think all of us have made some very stupid choices in our life. And the fact that we've made it here means that we've gotten a second chance. But there's a lot of people who never get that second chance. They make a choice, or they get positioned in a situation where they can't have an escape from that choice. And the reality seems to be that their soul made the choice. And that's pretty harsh. But, you know, that's part of the life experience. And each individual has that, and each individual has that opportunity. And so I think the reason that we all come here is with the bountiful aspiration of being able to make this place a better place. You don't come to heaven to trash it. You come to heaven to enjoy it. And the decision of whether you enjoy it or not should in reality morally be based on whether heaven has been graced by your presence, whether you have contributed to heaven. Is heaven better for you having been there? Or is heaven revulsed for you having been there? You see what I'm saying? And so we all have a choice of making a decision
Alex, did we
much.
lose? Whoops, I think we lost a few words there. Your mic was moving up and down, but there were no words. Maybe you want to start that thought over, the last thought?
Thank you, Mark. The point was that I guess I started to say, let me go back that far, and I started to say that if you're coming to heaven, you don't want to trash heaven. You want heaven to be heaven when you leave it as well. You know, you want to come to heaven and you want to leave heaven for someone else to come and enjoy heaven as well. I think that would be the normal thing to do. It's like coming into a nice hotel. You want to leave it nicely as well. You don't want to trash the place, but you know, there are people who do. I'm just saying that that's a different point of view. So fundamentally, you yourself, when you start the day, you have plans and you want to measure the success of your plans at the end of the day. And you say, is this planet better for me having been here? And I'm not saying how much better. I'm just saying even a little bit better. Or is the planet worse off for you being here? And if it is, and especially that's your opinion, well, this planet is worse for me being here. Well, you know, then that should make you sad, but it also, you know, should cause you to change your, shall we say, your actions. And so if it's worse, then that's a teaching point. And that gives you a chance, if you have a second chance tomorrow, to correct your actions and make it better. You see what I'm saying? But if your actions today make the planet worse, and then you perish in that process, that's an extremely harsh lesson. And so what is it that, you know, we're really trying to accomplish here? Are we just trying to get from day to day? Are we just trying to navigate around these, you know, these eruptions that we have every day? Or are we really trying to make a contribution to this planet? I'm not standing on a soapbox preaching here. I'm just saying that each of us individually has a responsibility, and that responsibility is to ourselves first. So
Right.
how can we help ourselves without helping the planet? It's not possible. This is what I'm saying. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, but I'm saying you're put on a treadmill, or you put yourself on a treadmill, and there's no time to think about that. That's why I thought it was so nice with the hovering car, where the man will be fed and the wife doesn't have to work all day. This will allow more time to open up new dimensions of exploration. But people are so much on a treadmill trying to figure out how to cover what they've gotten themselves into, or what they were put into, that there's no time for exploring anything. They're trying to figure out, how do I handle the next payment or bill that comes in? So there's no time to explore who you are, why you're here, other dimensions, so many other dimensions that could be explored. It's not even talked about.
Well, that's
Can I,
exactly. Go ahead, Selena.
can I say something in here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. We went way too. We are talking about the hotel, the heaven, right? And then if there is very comfortable and everything is there, and it would be like a heaven, or but other way, if we think about the big movie star, they have a big house, palace, big car, expensive car, everything. Everybody knows them, respect them. Everybody wants to meet them. Everything they have, money, famous, everything. Only some of them, they suicide. They don't want to live, so they suicide. Why? Everything. A lot of people do the same thing. They do those kinds of things because they don't have in their mind, in their heart. They have everything, whatever need. But important thing they don't have. They work a lot, and they earn whole life. They think, when I get those, I will be happy. And after getting everything out, oh, we are not happy. But I don't have happiness. That is the main point. I don't know each people, where is their happiness? Some people get happy in big stuff, in big house, money. Some people get happy in the small house. Some people get happiness in their with their family and friends. Some people get happiness in outside alone, in forest, maybe in the hill. There, so happiness and heaven, whatever it is, depend who what want and need, not not I am not finding good word for that. Not in the word stone or something. It's different people. So we need to find happiness inside our, and we need to find soul. And we don't know, we don't know about ourselves. Like we are always think about matter. Matter state, we are in liquid state, we are in, we take breath, we are in air, and then every state you can say we are all. So we always think about matter. So we want to earn everything in the matter, but get happiness. If we think different way, our whole side, which side I get happiness? I don't hurt other. Heaven. And the heaven is not one place. Heaven is me. Heaven is I am. I understood for one experience. But I don't know that much, but I feel that. So total subject we need to see different way. That's it. Thank you for listening.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Anyone else want to offer a thought, an idea, comment?
I have something, but I'll be changing the subject.
You can change the subject.
Okay, I was just waiting to see if someone wanted to jump in. We have a crisis, and a math problem. And then that has to do with the fact that we only have 100 health centers. And 100 health centers may be able to deal with 1 million people. And there's 8 billion of us on this planet. And I think we could easily say that, 10%, like let's really be conservative, say 10% of those people are sick with something that they could benefit from. So how do you deal with 800 million people when you can only deal with 1 million people? And, so that becomes a math problem. And the math solution means that the solution that you have is not enough. So we're coming up on the 27th of October with something different. And that is the possibility, I believe, where when we say that someone is unhealthy, that could mean, let's say, a dozen different things. But if there's something that people are unhealthy about that is common, is it possible for us to provide a service that addresses that particular thing as a common denominator? So in other words, instead of handling one person at a time, could we do 1,000 at a time? And just deal with that one thing. Or just deal with that one thing as a launch point, if you will. Why I'm bringing this up is because I think that's what's transpiring on October the 27th. Because I think this is an urgent situation. We have to do something to change the rate of change. What do you think about that, Brian?
Well, if you could reach with one wellness center 10,000 people simultaneously and they were processed for an hour, and you have 24 hours in a day, and these systems will be running day and night, and then you multiply that by hundreds of systems, or you could set a time for Parkinson's at 5 a.m. every day for anyone around the world who wants to deal with that condition. I think these systems can probably handle more than 10,000 people at a time.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, you see, but you know, there's certain systems that, certain conditions that are complex systems, or complex problems, I'm sorry. So, you know, if you look at a complex problem as layers, and you know, if you've ever had to strip paint from furniture, if you understand that you lay down the paint stripper and chemical, and you scrape off the paint, but if there are 3 layers of paint, you will only scrape the top layer, because the paint stripper gets consumed in that process. But what's the difference?
We're going right to the soul.
Yeah, no, just a moment.
Okay.
The thing is that we are in the process of stripping paint. Okay. No, we're not stripping the wood, we're stripping the paint. Okay. And unbeknownst to us, there was a second coat of paint. But you could say that with the first process, you started with 3 coats. Now you're down to 2 coats. You made progress of 1 coat. Now, let's say that each coat of paint was a different color. Now, let's say red, green, and blue. And let's say that the paint stripper that you have is specific for each color. Let's say it's a red paint stripper, green paint stripper, blue paint stripper. Let's say you use the red one and you take the red paint off. That would be a success, wouldn't it? That would be a move ahead. And that would take care of that condition. Now you have a new condition. You have green paint. We do it again, but this time you do it with a green paint strip remover. You see where I'm going? And you have success with that. Now you're down to the blue paint. That's a different condition. Now you bring in the blue paint stripper and you remove that. So if you were able to process, like you said, 10,000, and maybe not once, but you have to do it 3 times, that would still be a faster rate of change than doing 1 per hour. So if you could focus on the one condition and eliminate that one condition as if it were 1 layer, that would allow you to get to the next layer. But the assumption here is that everybody has 3 coats of paint. And I'm going to say some have 1 coat, some have 2, and some have 3. And I'm going to say that some have the sequence done differently, where some may be with the green coat on top, and some may be with the blue paint on top. Okay, so maybe 10,000 are all red. And of those 10,000, some have 1, 2, or 3 coats. And then you have another 10,000, and they are all green. But they too may have 1, 2, or 3 coats. You see what I'm saying? So for that particular process, we can do, I believe, and this is why I'm bringing the subject up, is I'm questioning, can we improve the mathematical tables by approaching it in this manner? What do you think?
Well, there must be a plan already. As he said, in the future, it'll be a rare instance to find a doctor. So again, whether it's this generation, the next generation, or whatever,
Yeah, but a generation is 20 years,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a loss of a whole generation waiting for this generation. I'm talking about changing the rate of change. And I'm seeing as this rate of change is urgent.
You mean like in one go?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Takesh has
exactly.
used those words.
Yes, well, yeah.
And I think that's his plan, to upgrade the whole lot in one go. Now, again, how long does that go?
Yeah, but also, like I say, it all depends on whether it's a simple or complex, situation. So, if we were to say, oh, I just want to get rid of this red paint, then all those who have the red paint, they could be part of that one go.
Sure. Well,
That makes sense. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, in a way, but it's just like the feeding. There'll be a certain time for feeding. Let's say 5 to 7 p.m. or whatever in your part of the world.
Is that the way it's going to work, or is it going to be working?
I think they're going to set certain times for certain things, general things, perhaps, like feeding. Everyone needs to feed. So
Are we going to say 5 o'clock for pizza, 6 o'clock for Chinese food?
You could be, again, different areas of the
I'm
world.
asking.
Yeah, I mean, if Thailand is 12 hours ahead of us, yeah, I think that's very possible. We'll set a feeding time. You put your headphones on and you're fed. You're good to go for another 24 hours or something. You could have one whole system dedicated just for feeding.
Well, Thailand's going to have its own system. So, are we going to be feeding Thailand on Thailand time, or are we going to be feeding Thailand feeding on all people from Thailand all over the world?
Yeah, that's possible too. Just like the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. If you want to join in, if it's 9 o'clock CET time, you'll have to adjust your time if you want to be there. If you want to be part of that.
Well, the other thing that I want to point out is that this October 27th meeting is coinciding with the expo in China, the health expo in China.
Okay.
And I'm just, thinking out loud, if there is a coincidence between the timing of this rate change process and this expo.
I don't know. But no coincidences. We aren't going to attribute things to coincidences.
I just can't get you to wade in the water, and you just have to make any. You're just non-committal, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be committal for you. I think that's possible. Timing is it's tremendously interesting timing because of not only does it I think coincide with the expo, but you know it's before the big November the 11th event in London.
I'm sure there's a lot of things moving in the background, Alex.
We forgot we are all machine.
Say again.
Sorry about that.
Say again, please.
The self-healing machine, we forgot that.
Mhm. The idea of last man standing, or woman.
Well, you know, this type of dialogue is you know, we have to compare it to, you know, traditional means. You know, since I had a severe health crisis in my family, you know, we got to understand better how the charities work, and they rank themselves, you know, and they say, well, you know, I'm heart and stroke, and you know, we're number one, or I'm cancer, and we're number one. And you know, I thought this was just kind of neat. These are things that we used to do at the football games when we were in school. You know, we are section number one, and we're the best. But that is not a chant. That is not a team cheer. That is a competition that is very intense because based on your ranking is the percentage of the pie that you get of the charity. So it becomes very important when you get diagnosed with a certain element that you get diagnosed for the preferred condition. I really found that to be very curious, and then when I explored it, you know, and I found out that you know there was a dollar bill attached to that, so you know that became very important in the whole scheme of things. And you know, rightly so. If you were to say suffer from I don't know, kidney disease, then you know you would lobby for funding for you know kidney research, and you know if you had heart problems, you'd lobby for heart research and that type of thing. And so the lobby thing becomes also another you know fundraising gimmick, and all of these things are tied to the value of money. And then you start to realize that you're not so much doing it for the love of what you're trying to contribute in terms of betterment. You're contributing in terms of financial reward. And so you know it just got to the point where I remember this one lady was telling me how she was doing funding for one of the health programs, and she was the winner in terms of raising money, and they awarded her a prize at this fabulous dinner. And the cost of the dinner came out of the money that she raised. And she was appalled at, you know, the lavishness of the dinner, and said, well, all this money is supposed to go for research. And I said, yeah, well, you know, but we want to reward you for all your efforts. And then she did some more work that she found out that 95 cents out of every dollar went to the funding group, and 5 cents went for research. So,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
an old game.
Yeah, it's an old game and it's a terrible game. And I don't think many people understand the rules of that game.
Right.
I was kind of surprised that they did find that out. So that 5 cents goes into a pot. And then all of the, competing charities are vying for ranking within that pot. So if you're number one, well, you get, I don't know, say 50% of the pot. It's kind of like horse racing, right? The winner gets half the pot, the second place gets half of the remainder, right? Until you get to the guy in fifth place, and he gets at least to eat. You know, the other horses in the race, well, they have to eat leftovers if there are any. So, but the contradiction in terms there, of course, is that the first 5 horses in a horse race get paid, but the betting public only gets paid on the first 3. So your horseman, the one you choose, may be a loser, but he gets to eat, and you lose all your money. And these are all little angles that you have to know, and this is getting back to what is the angle that you're playing. So, not to prolong the subject unnecessarily, it's just to say that part of the awareness and awakening, with respect to what's going on, is to understand the rules of engagement, and hopefully then you'll make the mistakes that you forfeit a second chance. And considering the kind of health situation that I had when I was 35, I was given 6 months to live because due to a medical condition, and so in a sense, I can honestly say that I've gotten a second chance. So do I want to continue making the mistakes that I made that happened in the first go around? And some people say, well, I overcame that, so I can overcome it again. So I don't have to change my ways. Well, no, that's a teaching lesson. That's to teach you that what you did gave you this result, and that result wasn't satisfactory. So you have to mend your ways, and the fact that you were able to return from that condition means you got a second chance. Not a second chance to repeat your mistake, but a second chance to use that mistake as a learning tool and pass the benefit of having learned that onto someone else, so they don't have to go through the same unnecessary ordeal. This is how people working together can help each other. And why is that so important? Because I have goods and services to sell to my neighbor. And if my neighbor doesn't have the money to pay for those goods and services because he has to pay for something that I know and I've gone through, and I know that it has taken money from him, it ends up taking money from me. So if I could help that person so that they could improve the quality of their life, and then in turn they could utilize my goods and services, and then together we can improve the quality of life in the community. And this is how the synergy begins to grow. And so that becomes a field, and every time we add to that field, it gains in field strength, and so on it goes. So understanding that concept is understanding plasma science. This is what I'm saying. And this should be a desirable thing for all of us. And it's there. It's there now. This isn't pie in the sky. This is happening right now, and we are part of this. And each and every one of us is going to be having a very special bonus And that is, we are going to be able to tell generations down the road that we were there at this important juncture as man's progress through eternity. Thank you all for allowing me to present today. I hope you all enjoy the session. And please stay tuned for the next exciting episode. Sparks are flying. Thank you all.